add production rollouts. See if there's more we can talk about there. And testing. What to do when test is the unreliable thing. So those are the agenda items I can see. Any agenda items anybody wants to add to this list?
Nothing off the top of my head.
So Michelle, you're typing one in. Right, document download page. Yeah. That feels like a really concrete thing we could look at compared to the other more open-ended things. Anything else, Michelle?
Not that I can think of.
So with this one, is that, are we at the stage of like trying to choose among a couple different options for how to implement it? Or yeah, am I right that it's a relatively self-contained thing we could cover in 15 minutes, or because then I would bump it up.
We can't ever cover anything in 15 minutes, but we can try. Yeah. I think it's relatively.
Do we have like some clear questions that we can like think through and answer, or is it more open-ended still? Just okay.
I think we had gotten it to a point where it was more clear, but I don't know if it will open up again. Is probably where it is.
Let's try that, and we'll just see, and we'll check in and remember at noon, like, oh, we wanted to talk about some of the other things too. But we'll start with that. Do you want to do a screen share? You're still muted. You're still muted, Michelle.
I can't start the screen share while you're sharing.
Okay. Yeah, I was just asking if you did want to start a screen share.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is the issue, which I assume is what we were screen sharing.
Yep.
I think we've gotten all our suggestions in place, which is getting rid of this, getting rid of this. Making the email part of the table instead of separate from it. Maybe giving this more space, though that was unclear to me if we had decided on that. And so there was also Michael saying that he wants the a copy of the documents to be as long as they can add their own one.
Which they can, yeah.
Well, they can't if it's all in the table. He said he wants a title for the send button in particular.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's part of the table, it doesn't quite work.
So here, the way I was thinking of that change is we can't go back in. It would not be productive to go back in and change a bunch of existing interviews, right? This feature. So I'm saying we add a new option to the download list that lets you embed the send button, but we don't get rid of the current function. We'd be duplicating the functionality.
Okay, would we be changing the current functionality?
I think probably we shouldn't change it at all, except maybe consider changing the heading level so that it doesn't, because it's inaccessible right now.
Mm-hmm.
That was a separate issue that I had raised. And I do think we need to change that.
Do we know how Matthew feels about changing the heading level?
I think we should follow the approach that we've been taking, which is to use, like, I guess it should probably be H2 class equals H4 or something like that.
Yeah.
So it will visually look the same. And we can just communicate that with Matt so that he has a chance to make sure it.
I thought we didn't want it to look the same. I thought we wanted it to be smaller.
Well, like I said, I don't think we should change that for existing interviews.
Okay.
Without really, I mean,
that was my question, so that's fine.
Okay.
Whichever decision, as long as we decide on something.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it looks kind of messy right now, but if people have built like documentation around it, and since we're adding a new version of it, it probably makes sense to not touch the old one except to make it accessible.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're getting to the point, just the maturity of a project where like we should probably add new features, maybe try to figure out ways to mark old ones as deprecated. I don't really think that applies too much, but at least like add things without removing or changing as much. Yeah.
Okay. So, all right, we'll have to write these down or I won't remember them as I go, but.
Do you think,
that's
yeah,
fine.
could they go on the existing issue or should they go somewhere else? I guess we could put them in the notes from our
I think
meeting
the
too.
existing issue is fine. And
Okay.
we could put them in the notes yeah. I mean, if we want right now, we can put them in notes in our in the document, but otherwise. I can,
So about the spacing thing, I do think that, can we scroll up a little bit? Yeah, I don't think we can have the spacing that we're using up a little bit more to the revised version, the draft that we did with the right alignment.
this is
Yeah, that spacing, to me, it does not work. Like it doesn't communicate very well that the text goes with those buttons, and especially like the way that it sends text to the next line. So I think we have to figure out how to get rid of that giant gutter, but I don't know the solution to it. So
Well, I think
maybe
if we
putting it in
assume
the
that the
same
buttons
table,
are
that helps.
always going to be that size, then we might be able to. I think first of all, using the column
The bootstrap
column, yes, instead of a table might help. And that might be more responsive. So we might find that that solves the problem by itself.
So I guess we could left align these buttons like we did before, as long as the send button was in the right row. And we could do that by just using one container, right? That was part of the issue. Like these look fine
Well,
aligned.
so we'd have to end the email where the titles end, right? So this would all be in the left column and this could be in the right column. That could work. Otherwise, I'm not sure what you're proposing. Like the email couldn't cross, like it wouldn't be, if the send button was over here or even over here, it would never be aligned with the left aligned version of this, right?
It could be if we're using Bootstrap to lay out that grid, but it depends.
I'm just saying that the email could
when being a
never be
table.
this wide and also have everything left aligned and have this edge of the send button lined up with
Be
this
left
edge of
aligned.
the
You're right. If it were left aligned, that wouldn't work.
So
Yeah, I mean, actually, I really like this really strong, clean line on the right anyway. So I would probably, it's a better alignment if we can get the text on the left to look better, to use more of the space. That is when I say look better.
Sure. Do we know what, to me, it's unclear what's, if it were in the table, it'd be unclear what is being emailed.
Well, I actually don't think that's the case because I mean, unless the download zip button has the same relationship right to the table.
Yeah, my take is it's similar to the download zip, where it's like the download zip is a part of the table and it's downloading everything. And if
So
it's
because it's under download zip, it's clear that it's sending download zip.
It's not sending a zip, but it's clear because in the same way that the download zip button clearly relates to the whole table, that the email button would also relate to the table.
yes. It would get less clear if we started doing other things that I know we've talked about, but I don't think we're doing right now, which are like multiple bundles on a page, and one of the bundles only has one. Like the first bundle only has one document, and then the next bundle has multiple documents. That becomes unclear, but that's not something I think we're doing at all, of having multiple bundles on the same page.
Yeah, I have some interviews like the UpToCode interview where right now that's what's happening.
Oh, we do.
I don't know if we'll keep it that way. I don't, basically there's the court documents and everything else. Because people can use it Opticode to send letters and notices that aren't filed in court. And I do want to separate that from the download of the things that go to court for now.
That's
But I might
that's
not
fair.
like how it looks. But that's basically where this issue came up, was with that multiple bundles.
That's fair. I was gonna say I think the thing that is confusing about it is if there's multiple bundles, but one of the bundles only has one document. That's like the key core confusion in a lot of the things here. Is if you only have one document, it looks like the bundle is only a document, but then the next one might have more than one, and so I think that's the main confusion.
And I guess a way around that would be to create another bundle, which you don't show visually on the screen, but it just connects to the send button so that the send button does download everything on the page. That would be a way to work around it for a developer to do. Basically, you have 3 bundles, two show on screen. One is a email link only without any other content showed on screen.
Is there anything we need to do to change that? Because I mean, they can just,
No, that's just a developer thing. I'm just thinking it through out loud.
okay,
I mean, I think we could use spacing. White space would help a lot. The right white space to visually tie the things together. But your point about like there's only one file in the first bundle, and then it is not clear that the send button sends a bundle because you don't even know there is a bundle. It's just one document. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
We don't really know how people are using the email feature right now. I mean, it's definitely not designed to be sent directly to someone like an opposing party. It's supposed to be your archive for your records, but people might not be using it that way. So I don't know. Well, for me, at least I would try emailing it to myself at least once so I knew what the email looked like before I would directly email to somebody. But that may not be how people use it. Okay, well, does this, I know we talked through some other stuff about how people will use the feature, but is this enough direction to think about how to implement it?
from what I understand, it will be a table up here that can include an email and a send button. These will be right aligned. Please, it's unclear if you wanted them right aligned or left aligned, but we want to reduce the gutter if possible. This text will be gone. And then this will exist, and it's unclear if you wanted to change the style, this like by itself still would exist as a thing that people can add with the same size of title, just not using a header. And I'm unclear if you wanted me to change to have this right aligned or not.
The send button in the existing
in
thing?
the existing thing, to change any of the styles in the existing thing.
I suppose if we're changing the download list so it always right aligns those buttons, having at least this one clear line is probably a safe change to make. I don't know. What do you think, Bryce? I don't think that will really disrupt people's styling.
Technically, not technically, it shouldn't. I agree that it feels like it shouldn't, but I don't. Honestly, I feel like that for that one, I don't remember what Matt said, but I know normally they have much more strict styling requirements, and so if we change something that will change something on his styling, that's a pretty good indication that maybe he'll be like, hey, why did this happen? Can I change it back?
Good point.
So we ask him here or about that particular thing?
Sure. That makes good sense to me.
Okay. I'm not gonna post it now, but
No, yeah. It's a good.
Yeah, that's fair.
It will be something we could ask, and if he says sure, and if it's either way, we could still change it. But it would just be, I think we should wait a little bit and give him some time to fix it before.
all right. I'll try and remember to do that comment a little later. All right. Are we good? Is that basically sum up what we needed?
Yeah, and I'm writing down some notes in the in our living agenda.
Okay. And this was in the first 15 minutes, so
We did it. We
like,
did it. 15
yeah,
minutes.
at about, yeah.
Do you want to stop your screen share, Michelle?
Yeah, I'm trying
Great.
to I was trying to get the document, so I'm just gonna write approximately the time.
Sure.
So you can go back and look at it.
For the
Yeah.
video.
Yeah,
Yeah, 12:01. I think we started. I don't know when we started. I think it was about
40.
15 minutes, like you said, because I remember that's what we said.
yeah,
when
we
were
started like
40 or
47 or
40.
something.
Yeah.
All right. So I think it kind of makes sense to do the bigger testing discussion before we go to production rollouts because they seem connected.
Yeah, testing first.
Okay.
So if AleKiln is really unreliable as far as tests go, then I mean, I think there's a bigger question of, is AleKiln a thing that should exist, right? The question is, why is it unreliable in our interviews? So like, yes, there's a question of what should we do with our interviews. For me, there's a big question of what should we do with Kiln if this isn't a problem that's solvable with Kiln, right?
That's possibly true. I mean, I do think so. You know, this is one of the first big multi-developer projects that I've worked on where we had a goal of doing a lot of tests. So there could be a broader, I imagine that test breaking is not an uncommon thing, and people have to make choices about how much time to invest into fixing the tests. It probably has to match the complexity of the thing they're building and their team size. So they have to make.
But
it's not a
You have
matter
some
of
thoughts about it, Bryce?
fixing.
This is my thoughts. This is like the one, like my one experience at and that's the thing is I was at a bigger company though.
Yeah.
But like my one internship or my several internships at Google were like entirely about like flaky tests and trying to make sure like one that they aren't like taking up a bunch of developer time, and the like trade-off math is very different for Google in here, but at least the idea that like there's always going to be flakes, you can't really get around that. But like I think we're definitely at a point where like it's too flaky, and if it is failing fairly often if we don't know if it's like if it gets to the point where a developer ever looks at a test and it's like, oh, this is likely a flake, I'm just going to ignore it. You've gone too far, and the tests aren't super useful anymore.
I looked through like some of the
I don't think it's an
errors.
AleKiln overall thing. I think it's like, okay, this test is flaky. We have to either fix that test scenario or turn it off. Like make that choice, right? Like it's not, I'm not saying AleKiln isn't useful. I think I definitely have seen that it is useful, but.
Agreed. I think it's, I haven't seen, sometimes there are like the occasional, and I know Michelle, you have been putting in a ton of work, and I think it's improved for like the retry stuff. I do think it's just some of the Weaver tests and the assembly line tests that are like uploading and doing a lot of stuff with the documents are kind of flaky because docassemble is flaky. And so the idea, like, I think that I don't really think the issue would be Kiln. I think the issue would be docassemble being better and slightly faster with like document uploads. But I'm not. That's another completely big other topic.
Sure, and we could add that to the documentation. I mean, if it's just flaking because of uploading documents, then that's something we can add to documentation. If there are other reasons it's flaky, then yeah, I don't know. I have questions about that. But
yeah.
I did look at the failures that have been happening. Some of them, they're not as many as I expected to find, and like, you know, one like there were a few of them that were not Kiln failures. So the Kiln failures that I did find, there was a 504 on setup and a 501 on setup, which 501 is a very interesting error that's the server isn't implementing that API. And it definitely does. So I don't know what of the server wasn't available, but it was a server availability issue.
It might have been like a server restarting so that it was like anyway, there's like a placeholder Nginx instance that then gets taken over by the real thing. It might have been something like that. Potentially. I don't
Yeah,
actually know.
I think they were like mostly timeout stuff. There were a couple that were, I mean, there's also the Weaver tests, which there was one test which was an upload and it didn't upload in time. And that I think there are solutions for. But other ones were timeout things, which we could change the amount of time we give for a timeout. Or, I mean, another option is to always rerun the tests at least once. You know, instead of like checking the error, just rerun the tests and see if it passes the second time.
That is the first thing that is really easy to throw at flakes, and if it passes the next time, then you can automatically sort of assume it's a flake and like brush it off as not a big deal.
Yeah.
So
instead of like spending, 10 minutes kind of trying to hunt it down, you just like rerun it, and then if it's still
And that is
an
something I often
error,
do, actually. So that's actually that seems like a safe thing.
So I mean, it retries failed tests anyway, but that the same problem that made it error could be continuing to happen at that time. So if it's a little while later, it might work better. So I don't know. Other than that, catching problems with ALKiln being flaky, I think is useful in some ways, but if your experience, Bryce, has been in the past that all tests are flaky, and you just decide how much flakiness you're going to put up with or how you're going to handle flakiness, then maybe it's still worth it,
yeah, and I think overall things are still worth it. Like I'm with Gwen there that like it's 100% is still worth it. It's just a matter of like how much do we accept? And even I don't even like, I think one of the things that I remember being confused about is the fact that sometimes retrying still like prints as a failed test. Or I don't know if it was like printed as a failed test or did some other thing. Or I don't remember if this was some of these other. I went back and looked at all of the last, like I'm going through some of the failures, like Kiln failures on assembly line for the past 30 days. And yeah, like
I mean, in the report, it says, I'm going to try it again. Or I might try it again if it's I'll try it a maximum of 2 times.
Mhm.
In the Cucumber report, if it passed the second time, it doesn't report it again. I don't know how to access that. Like, I wish I could access that to put that in the report appropriately, but I'm not sure how that's doable.
Yeah, that's
But so is that what you're referring to, or is it something else?
It's something else, and it might just be, I know we didn't add the retry to user, like the action itself that you ran from another repo didn't actually run the second retry.
It does
Right,
now, though.
It does now, but I don't. Yeah, I'm looking at some ones from earlier last month, and so it may not have done it then. So that may have been part of the thing, but
Okay.
I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to drag it on. Mostly to say that I think the calculus is still like we need to run it if we could just find an easier way to like run everything twice, and make it super clear that like it succeeded once. We don't have to don't bother looking at this other failure that we can and that's fine, and that's that would make it very useful. I think is the thing. I think the real thing is being able to easily hide the failure that we could assume is flaky. Like if we ran something twice and it fails once, or it only fails once, then the developer shouldn't need to worry about developer shouldn't need to worry about like the one failure if they don't want to. And it shouldn't be like, oh, test is failing, which GitHub makes it very GitHub doesn't help us in this regard because GitHub makes it so it's like if anything fails once, it's listed there.
I think these days it like a rerun will like replace the visual of the failure. It'll turn green and it'll be happy with it.
It won't show both the error and the retry is what you're saying. Or maybe you
Yeah,
can dig
that's
into it
been my
deeply, but it kind of collapses it. So it's visually like one
Yeah.
test. That is kind of what I remember too, that it's when you do click a retry button from here, that it won't show as it won't show the error anymore. Is that the same way? We might trigger it a totally different way though here, right? Like we probably want to rerun just the scenario that failed.
Yes.
Yeah,
Because
that's
otherwise you might get a new combination of failures.
yes.
Not
that's
more,
true.
not you wouldn't hope that would happen, but it seems like it could.
Yeah, but I mean, aside from writing a separate, no, I don't think there's a way to just rerun. Yes, actually you can. There is a way to just rerun one scenario. Don't know why I didn't think about this. So if you give every scenario a tag like at my favorite test or whatever, my favorite scenario, then we have a way to input a specific tag to manually run the test and input a specific tag. It won't get rid of the old test failure. That's what it won't do. But you would manually run the workflow with a specific tag. And then it would only test that scenario.
Well, what I'm saying is like, let's say you get to the end of an interview and you reach an error screen. Instead of actually showing error in the log, if you just like, let's try that again, it didn't work. That's what I was imagining. But
Oh, so not manually, you mean automatically.
we would want this to be manually. Automatically, I mean, sorry, I said the complete opposite.
So
way.
it does do that automatically. It
It always
reruns them
retries.
once. Retries once. Yeah.
Every scenario is always retried,
Nope.
regardless of error.
Just the failure.
Every failed scenario is always rerun once.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, that means that this won't actually help that much, probably, right?
Don't know. Might depend. I mean, it's kind of random. Randomness is random.
Well, it will help some. I think it's more of like when it was it last week or the week before that we actually made this change such that people using Kiln would like the tests would rerun because it was fairly recently that like that change was made.
Fairly recent.
And so like at least half of the failures from the past month have been like likely would be failing from stuff like that. And going through some of the newer ones, they're different.
The last couple ones I did see were being retried and they had failure both times. So they may have been hitting the same problem. For example, if the server was reloading and we didn't give it a long enough time to reload in our environment variables, then by the time it tries it again, it might still be reloading. So it might just run into the same issue, the same reload.
Yeah.
Well, let's go into like a specific choice. So like I don't know about the Weaver KW arcs being missing thing. That was a weird one. I don't think is a real error, but maybe we should check into it. So what would be our strategy? Like let's go to the assembly line. That's an easier one. I know that we frequently have failures with the AL document test, even though that code hasn't changed in a couple of months. It like maybe, I don't know how often, but pretty frequently you get an error. And it's not one that I've seen in production, but of course I'm not using the exhibit code very often either. So, but it's not very helpful when I make a change to totally unrelated code to get that error message. Would we just disable that scenario?
We can just disable that scenario.
And then say, okay, we're going to open an issue and said, track down why this test is failing, but at least it's not disrupting every time we touch other unrelated code. What
Sure.
would be the right thing to do there?
I mean, I think that's a decision for people who are trying to deal with the error. Like, for me, it would depend on my chemical stability that week. So, if we leave it just to track down some other time, by the time we get around to it, our logs for these errors might have disappeared. So we would want to save the logs and the artifacts of these errors and get them like so that we can examine them in the future when we're trying to track them down. That's like, I want like caution on how to implement that.
But in that scenario, like where we assume, okay, it's the test that's flaky or there's some race condition happening. Race condition is something I guess we should really make sure doesn't happen to people in production. But if the error doesn't come back, there's not really anything for us to track down, right? So we would get new logs when we turn the test back on.
Yeah, but
The error
they'd
would happen
be
again.
because they wouldn't be consistent, right? So a person would have to run them over and over and over until and they might not run into the same thing. But
Yeah, I feel
mean-
like that's not too big of a burden compared to like the infrastructure I think we would need to set up to like. I guess we're just saying,
You
okay,
need
we're
to
going to turn off
upload
this
the
test. Let's
files.
archive all of the tests that failed and attach them to the issue. So maybe that's not a big
yeah,
burden.
that's the suggestion. But
Notice that
yeah.
we don't have a very long list of fixes here, like the one that's already happening.
I have larger fixes, but they're like, I know that they're bigger in scope and not like things that we could quite take on for. And they're also more kiln things that we could do of like have an option to spin up the Dockassemble container, like because that's a thing you could do of like spin up a Dockassemble container in the workflow. It takes 20 minutes or something, probably longer on GitHub, but it like timeout failures will be very low because it won't be like interfering with other repos doing like trying to push things. It would be a lot more consistent with like reload times because we know exactly what the packages we're installing. It's going to be like these 5 packages, and we don't have to worry about production and tests just always take really long to reload, and I never know why. Like they consistently take longer to reload than like a local Dockassemble server running, and that might be AWS. That just might be the number of packages we have on there, or the number of sessions or something. But like that's a moonshot that I've had in my head for a while. I just haven't been able to try and like think about all the small things you'd have to add. You'd probably have to add some stuff to Dockassemble to get it working well, or to get it to be able to do something like that. But
I'm going to just check for one second. I'm pausing my share for a second here. I just want to see if we have that module blacklist turned on, which we do. Okay, never mind.
Which module blacklist?
So there's a feature in Dockassemble that's very new that tells it to stop scanning every module file for the preload line. And the preload line means that the code will run. Yeah, and it's actually really nice for us. We'd had this problem before where when someone was developing that combo box feature, like got an error logged every time on every screen, remember? But it was in someone's playground.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Want to delete their playground. This would fix that problem. But I was like, oh, maybe that's why it's taking so long, because it's scanning all the module files. But no, we already turned it off on the test server.
Okay.
I do like the idea of the Dockassemble server getting spun up. That feels like it would solve a lot of problems. But of course, we don't want it to take 20 minutes to test every time. So we maybe have to figure out like what are the times we'd want to do that. Like maybe if it has a failure, then
I'm thinking that if it's just pushes to, because the thing is there's 2 phases to like doing things. Is there's like you're on a branch and you want to make sure that things are running and working well, and that's when you're also more likely to be like looking at this thing has failed. If you're specifically working on a branch and like making sure that all the tests are running, you'll be like, hey, let me like look at this. and that's when you also want it to be quick, like within 5 to 10 minutes. And what we have now, I think, works well for that. But then there's the alternate side of like, okay, this is all of the tests running on main. This is the stuff that like we want to be the equivalent of like the golden standard. And if it's on main, it should be passing, and we don't want to have to consistently like look at fires that are happening on main. If we are already on the branch looking at this is an error, we can write in the PR like, hey, like going through, this is a timeout error on Kiln's side. Like I've manually tested it through, or like sometimes I'll do that if it's like if I have my Kiln stuff set up right on my computer, I'll just be like, I ran through this Kiln test locally, it works, and it's just so it's an issue with like the server restarting or something. I know, and you can know that that's the case. Or if you can go through it manually and it's fine, it's probably an issue with the server restarting. And so that makes me feel like if it's we could just have we could just have a workflow that runs only on main. That does the more complicated setup. But it also does that, and it also catches some other, it would catch some other things of making sure like if someone just installed that one package on the server, that it would work.
So we would make sure we would have the dependencies set up. Actually, I really like that idea because we always have the test run. We're doing pull requests, then it would always run beforehand. So this would be testing. Sorry, what were you saying, Bryce?
No, I was going to say, like, this is the thing, is it sounds really good, but I know it's a lot of work, because I know at the top of my head we'd have to be able to, we'd either have to set up a thing that would manually log into the newly spun up server and then create an API key and then copy the API key out to like the test and then use it, or we'd have to have a way, we'd have to add to Docker symbols Docker setup, like, hey, add this API key at start, which also seems complicated. And then on top of that, being able to, there's probably going to be other weird Docker symbol things of like running on GitHub workers, making sure that they do stuff right. So it's mostly I'm introducing it because it does feel like the right solution, but it's also the solution that takes at least a week of engineering time of only doing that, if not more.
If not more.
And also like convincing Jonathan to do some, like add some features, which shouldn't be hard. This is like a thing that I feel like he's pretty responsive to. Like I know he thinks Kiln is cool, and I do also know he is like always seems to be making small subtle changes to like deployments and like Docker AWS stuff, and this is also that would also be like related to this of like these changes we'd be making. But I don't know.
I do want to say we could switch things around, just so if we add tags that will automatically pass tags in that say, you know, only run this tag, which everything other than the AL exhibits or whatever, or AL document stuff could say at auto. So we could give everything else an auto tag and only run that tag. And then in a manual workflow, we would have to make sure that a manual workflow would be able to override that to put in, you know, and then you could run the full tests manually.
That would be a way to let us manually run this AL exhibit test.
And to limit the test to only be non-document test when it's automatic. Yeah.
Could we also just make like a separate workflow, or is it too complicated because of the way that it just runs everything in the static or the sources folder, right? So actually that wouldn't really work. If there's test is there, it'll run.
No. It's if
Other than the tag.
we could use tags, and then we could have two workflows, one that is only run manually,
right,
which uses all, you know, which doesn't pass any tags, so it does all of them, and one that runs everything that is not document related.
Hey, I'm just trying to think if there's a way to not have to change the existing files to add a tag, but that's not like a huge issue. So it sounds like that would probably be
that might already also be the case. I know. I haven't looked at those tests recently, but I know that at least I know, Michelle, when you add the tests, you're very good at adding tags.
Yeah, I didn't know how people felt about tags in this. Like whenever I write tests for AleKiln, I add tags, but I didn't know what people
I feel
thought
like
about that here, so I haven't done
Yeah.
it here.
I think okay. I was gonna say, I think when I first started doing things, I wasn't quite sure the like, not the purpose, but sort of like what's the motivator for tags. But I feel like the more I use things, the more I do like understand. Oh yeah, tags are really great, and so
Yeah.
and we have an ale
This is-
.ro. No, it's not.
Oh yeah,
What's the
I've
tag?
added some tags. AL
At E1.
exhibits
Okay.
at AL exhibits is the one that's consistent for this file. I may have added a feature tag if you go to the very top at AL document. So we can just, if we have tags on the other AleKiln tests, then we can include those tags, or we can say not AL document or whatever.
That seems like a good idea to let people run this particular test just manually when they want to. Yeah, that feels like a good solution. Is that something we could easily implement then? We just
Yeah,
have to add
and not
another
a-
tag here to these essentially, and then set up.
No, we
the-
don't have to add any tags. We have the tags we need.
It would be a change to the workflow file for just
Yeah.
this repo, right?
Yep, we would either just change the workflow file or we'd do two workflow files. So probably if we just, it's a pain in the butt to do the changes to our existing workflow file, but that's probably what we want to do.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, that sounds like an action item. Michelle, is that something that you want to take on?
I think I can do that. No guarantees, but I will
Okay.
work on that. Or if Bryce wants to take it on, I think do you know enough about actions? Maybe not.
Well, I do know enough to take it on. I'm still swamped with the two immediate deliverable stuff that I'm trying to do.
Okay, so I can try and do that.
Yeah.
Quentin, the file names are not too long, so I don't know why you can't open them in Windows.
They are, yeah. Here's the
it
problem.
depends.
So when Windows creates when
So
you
is
want to
it the
open a
whole
file,
path that's too
it's
long?
the whole path that's too long. Yeah. So
Holy moly.
that one actually is opening. Oh, because I already renamed it. That's one.
Okay.
This one. One of these was giving me a problem.
If you go
If
into
it's
one,
deep
I
enough
don't
in the
even know
path,
how to
basically.
solve that. Is there, I don't know.
I
Well,
don't think there's a
wanna-
consistent way other than just having generally shorter names. I think that that's a Windows thing that I think is stupid. I run into that on my laptop and I get upset. But
It is, yeah. So there's a lot of ways to solve it. Like, I mean, I have a pretty short starting path here. Users, QStanos, downloads. So
Yeah.
that's not the problem, but it does factor in the whole path. When I shorten this name,
Yeah.
it's enough to let me extract it. But of course,
Okay.
I could imagine there's times people have longer feature file names, I guess. Is that what creates this first part?
No, it's ours. It's manual. I mean, we've hard coded that in, but
I mean, this could be shortened, right? This descriptive part at the time.
because otherwise I mean, you could run multiple tests on one day and you'd have folders with the same name and you wouldn't be able to tell which ones were which.
What about just putting in hyphens instead of spelling out the unit? Because it really is
Some
just to make
people
unique
I've
file
talked-
names.
we've
Some-
had,
some people I've
this is
talked
conversations
to-
we've had.
Some people I've talked to have said that that's not very clear to them what the numbers mean.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
you
it's
could just put
to
a
make it unique.
timestamp that's not recognizable to a human, right? But then it doesn't help people identify which test it was.
Are there a lot of people running like multiple tests a day and they need to go back in and look? This feels like a real problem that people might pop up in a usability test, but also one with like very limited applicability compared to not being able to open the test at all.
Are the tags still printed out in most of like the names? Because
The
that was one
names?
thing.
No.
Yeah.
No, we removed tags.
We removed those already. Okay.
So I don't know. You all tell me what you want out of the name and I will do it. I am concerned about confusion.
But who's
Um,
going to be, like, I just want to make sure we know, like, who are we thinking would be confused?
Well, so the from what I understand, it's times are useful for like, or the spelled out time is useful because trying to do the entire date, it's like it's generally is just more difficult to grok like year, month, day, dash. You can't do because also to do windows, you can't do colons or any weird things like that, and so you have to do another dash, day, like hour, time, something else, and you can't do, and so you can't do colons on times, which is like the UTC timestamp way of doing things would be to put colons there. But so since colons can't go in, you either have to have like you have to do dashes between the times, which isn't readable, and a lot of these things are like, yeah, someone could take an extra like 15 to 30 seconds to be like, oh, okay, I think this is what is happening, but it's like 15 to 30 seconds in either direction of like or every time you look at the file name, which if you're trying to debug something, like gets to be a lot. And then you still also need the times on the individual screenshots and stuff, because I think that affects, like, you can have multiple screenshots in the same test, and so you can see like, oh, this one happened after that one.
Question.
This is the or the same question, like this one happened after this previous one or something like that.
Oh, and here the thing is like the destination path is too long. It's interesting because I think that's like somewhere in the temp folder. Actually, let's see. Okay, it goes to C Windows System 32.
and
That's where it
sometimes it's
saves it.
this, yeah.
That's weird. That doesn't seem right,
Sometimes
actually.
it's a scenario folder. I mean, it gets longer.
Let me just try it. Like, what
Association.
about if we just made it so that they're all one character rather than 3 characters plus a space? So 16H, 41M, 38S. And I don't really think that UTC adds anything.
UTC
Okay.
actually adds a lot, because otherwise you look at it and you'll think, is this my time zone?
All right. But again, it's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, who's looking at this? Like, what if we just put it UTC then? That one opens okay. That change.
Does the scenario
Um,
folder open okay?
There's also something that was, I think, wrong. I forget what it was. Let me see. Oh, right. I mean, I think this is confusing also because it makes it seem every time I look at it, it's like, oh, that test took a really long time to run. But it's not, I don't parse this as a timestamp. I look at it as like a running time the first time, every time I see it. I'll get used to that. That's not a big deal. But maybe here it's plural. In the other scenario, it's singular.
It got changed.
No, here, this is plural. And then the files inside are singular.
Hmm.
HR instead of HRS. But I think like either way, it makes it seem like like no one says 16 hours is when I did something. They might say at 1600 if they're like into military time or in Europe probably. So
Yeah,
maybe
the problem is not
they
having
would make it more clear
colons.
instead of less clear.
Yeah, I think
I
that's the
mean-
issue.
I mean, figuring out what is more clear is the
But
problem.
I do think like, okay, so I don't know that the audience for this is one where like they're already absorbing a lot of information. So I do wonder like how important it is that they can parse the timestamp really quickly. It's like it's already assuming a lot. Like they created their own ALKiln tests. They're trying to look and find one of many runs that they did to see exactly what time it was. They've already downloaded it to their computer. In this case, right? They're not looking at the GitHub page, which lets them download it, which says explicitly what time it ran. They just have a bunch laying around in the folder somewhere. So unless they're talking about doing manual runs, is that the issue? Like they're not using GitHub Actions to run it?
Or they did a bunch of commits at the same time and downloaded.
Yeah,
Then
that's the thing I'm thinking of like if there's an issue, the best people will have is to commit again, and then if it fails, you download again, and then you have 2 or 3. And that's why like the full timestamp is important, and and so like you'll have multiple within minutes. Yeah, like within minutes of like, did it change this? Did it work? Change this? Did it work? Like, yeah.
We can't assume a time zone for people, right? We really need to be
Because
UTC.
it's the GitHub time zone.
Yeah, it's GitHub.
That's the server, right? Doesn't know what the user is.
Yep.
You're able to parse the number in some other ways, but I'm wondering, like, could that be a secret, a GitHub secret or something? The time zone. It's a little bit finicky. But maybe not worth pursuing that particular idea.
It's an option. I mean, yeah, there's nothing that prevents you like when you start up the server setting a time zone.
Or just even like
to the
translating the time that GitHub sends you into the local time zone, even if you don't set it on the server. But setting on the server would be.
What's the local time zone? Like, you need to, if they, like you said, if you can get the local time zone in the action, the running action itself, you can just set the time zone of the server that's running, and then that's fine, and everything will work fine.
Well, I think what Quentin is saying is putting a secret in that does like GMT instead of UTC. Like we have the ALKiln version thing, which I know we're thinking of removing, but like we have the ALKiln, it doesn't have to be a secret.
Well,
it's an environment variable, right?
Yes,
Setting
that's
an
Yeah, I didn't know
environment
what it was.
variable.
Okay,
that's the only way of, and that's what I'm saying is once you get the environment variable, you'd set the runner to, maybe we're talking about the same things. I don't think there's any.
You don't have
Essentially, you
to
were
set
talking
the
about
runner. You could just do it in the date function.
That's what I was.
Let's just set the runner.
That's saying is what I meant.
That's what okay, that's fair. But I guess I'm saying that seems a lot more complicated than just adding one line in the workflow and then the time zone works. Like you don't have to have. We shouldn't be re-implementing time zones in our date function in JavaScript.
Fair
We should
enough.
be setting the OS to the right time zone, I think. But either way, like I think we've all landed on the same thing. That is like it does need to be something that the user passes in. That's an option, and that would help, and that would at least get rid of UTC. But I don't know how. I guess we need to probably do it. It would
maybe even just
if we looked at things
S.
for maybe.
Let's see.
I was gonna say maybe if we looked at things, we could be probably like roughly like, oh, if someone like looked at a test case or a specific test scenario, we could say someone will download this, it'll be this long, like their like users/username on Windows will be this long. We can sort of guess like if actually getting rid of UTC in 2 or 3 places is enough, or if it's like people just have long enough names that it's always going to be over there. Like in most common cases, I'm afraid of like byte shedding on the exact like a few characters here and there, and then like most it's like if it happens once, it's going to happen again on a different like with a test name that is 5 more characters, or like because I know some of them are the IDs of the screen. Like the ID of the screen is 5 more characters, and so it will just keep doing this on Windows. And I don't quite know what the better solution is besides just at some point truncating the entire thing, or like one level of the entire thing to just be like ALKiln. I don't know.
Yeah, ALKiln, that might work because if you have a timestamp and it's readable and you don't have to translate it in your head to the correct time zone, that's probably all you need to know what test you're looking at.
You mean shorten the beginning of it? Yeah, we can do that for sure.
Yeah. Oh, and test output is the same for every test, doesn't matter what test it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I guess that's not adding anything either over just ALKiln.
Yeah.
But I do think we should make these numbers match. I think the S is confusing here. But of course, I'm just inserting myself into a conversation you've already been having, it sounds like, for a while. And that's just my opinionated
The
perspective on
S
it.
where? At
After
the end?
every unit?
I don't know why it's still there.
Yeah, that's
a
the thing.
problem, but
I think
Oh, you
it's
thought you
probably
done
an
but
it.
it's not. But
it's a
it's not going to be. I don't think a great time saver.
It actually was enough to let me open it, but that's, yeah, I guess it's a tailored
Yeah.
Yeah, I
example.
think it's like this is 160.
This could have been longer, I
three,
guess. It's the
or it's
ID
like-
number.
Yeah, like if it's like 263 characters, it might not be quite enough. But if it's like,
Yeah.
or this probably worked for that case. But like, I don't know what a general distribution of the lengths will be.
Well, within here, are the timestamps?
That's the other
important.
part. Is
And I
they
mean,
are for
Maybe we
some.
can make those timestamps instead of making them full spelled out times, because that would also help. Because both places, it's the internal file name and the path to the whole zip file. Those two things both matter in Windows. I mean, I can also turn on long file names on this computer. There is like a workaround. It's just sometimes it breaks really old legacy software, so they don't do it by default, even in 2022.
Which is weird. I don't use Windows enough to know if like that's a thing people just do.
Most people don't.
the other length problem is here where we use the scenario name.
Yeah.
Which can be very long. So like we have a thing cutting off these names at what I thought was reasonable, like, under
think so.
250 or whatever. But it seems like that's not going to be sufficient.
Well, it has to be combined with the zip file path plus some room for the user's download file.
Yeah, I'm
So,
just
yeah.
saying the full scenario names might not fit here for every developer. That might need to change as well to be shortened.
That is, I think, probably you could probably tell people, hey, use a descriptive word at the beginning of the scenario name. Don't save it for the end, ideally,
Yeah.
because it might get cut off. But I'm just thinking here, I can't rename it, so it's not doing what I wanted to do. But if we get rid of the day, but just kept a timestamp, and it just, in this case, would only be useful for me to sort them in order, right?
So
It's an ordering tool.
We'd keep 16, 15, 08, and milliseconds, but we would get rid of the date. Is that
Get
what
rid of the
you're
date and
suggesting?
get rid of the units, because it's just to help people sort in the folder. They still know which test
Well,
they're
the
looking at.
date helps people sort in the folder too.
When I say the folder, I mean the download folder. But presumably any given test runs over the course of one day, not 2 days. I could see edge cases, obviously. You have an hour-long test that starts at 11:30 at night. But
Mhm. Well, I mean, it could just be happening around midnight, but so you're saying get rid of the date and shorten the representation of the hours, minutes, and seconds to something, the numbers with dashes between them, or the just one letter?
well, I'm wondering if you actually need a human readable version of that, or
Well,
if it's
then we
just to
can just
sort
use a
people.
timestamp.
That's what I'm saying.
Like period, like no hours, minutes, seconds, just a plain timestamp.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how people use this information in here now. So
Well, I use
can
it to
say-
be able to differentiate between which tests I've downloaded where. Like I compare the action name and see that it matches my name.
So yeah, so it sounds like it's mostly just you're using it mostly for the wrapper and not for you're not looking at the timestamp for a particular image and
But
matching.
I haven't run
Yeah.
into multiple images. If I did, that might matter. But a timestamp would take care of that as well.
Yeah, the timestamp, but even a timestamp, just a timestamp is
I had a
think generally
timestamp
shorter.
and then someone said make it human readable. And I was like, okay.
yeah. This is the
yeah,
ever
I don't
present
wanna insert myself
conflict
in it.
of. Well, I mean, I think this is just an ever present conflict of like user feedback stuff. Of like user feedback is very valuable, but sometimes like I don't know. I'm sure if users had feedback on Windows long file names, they would have said, "Hey, don't do this, Windows. This is silly." and Windows didn't think about that back in 1995.
Well,
and I
I'm sure
still
it
hold
has
that
to
that's
do
the
with PC DOS, is where I think this starts actually.
so probably earlier.
And
But
then there
in
weren't other
general,
ways around it.
yeah, I was gonna say in general, like I think it was the right change to make, Michelle, at the time, Michelle. But
Yeah.
I think it's just one of those things of, oh, we've run into another technical barrier that, yeah, we can't do that. We have readable timestamps everywhere else that we can, including the like outermost zip file and all these other things. But
So just remove it in one place, just remove it for error files? Is that what we're saying? Or
that
just
would be a suggestion.
remove it everywhere?
My overall, I think these are a lot of good ideas for shortening things, but I think my suggestion for addressing these is to take all of these suggestions, like like I said, we should maybe try and do a quick like scenario of here's a scenario, like a standard scenario name. It might be between this long and this long. Here's like a standard like feature file that gets run. Its name might be this long from this long, etc. Do that, and then sort of calculate, okay, from all of that, our file name lengths are between 160 like characters to like 290 or something. And if it's 290, and if it's like all of like adding all like some of these really smaller fixes that don't take away that many characters, like if it's long enough that not taking away just a few characters at a time doesn't actually fix the problem, which is over everything over 260, then let's not worry about those and maybe do more sweeping changes. But if it's more of like, oh, longer file names will be like 5 to 10 characters over, then we can do some of these things that are like more work for us, but still like you still have a lot of the as much information as we can give users, and we're not like giving them less information, we're just sort of showing it in different ways. Whereas I'm worried that we spend all this time making file names shorter, and then, oh, if you're like in a particular style of writing, scenario names are still long enough that they are still causing people problems, that's the thing I'm worried about. And so I'd focus on that part first, and then once we have a good idea of, oh, they're over by a few characters at a time, or they're over by 30 characters at a time, then we can take our paths and use these suggestions, which I think we have a lot of good suggestions for shortening file names if we need to. That's my overall take.
So first assess how long the names might generally be, and then figure out how we can get down to the right length.
Yeah, and I think each of these we know, like getting rid of or like turning it into 16H14M, like gets rid of 4 characters. I can't do that in my head. But gets rid of some. We know the amount of characters.
We get rid of the space also, right? So we get rid of 3 characters per unit. So hours, minutes, seconds. So but
essentially we know exactly how many characters each of these things would improve on, and so from that we can, if we know how many, like know what we need to fix, we can pick and choose which ones we think will save the most while are like still closest to sort of what we think is best for the users to read.
Yeah.
And I'll try and take some of these. I'll try and take all of these suggestions we've had, put them in an issue, and also sort of start to flesh out, this will save this many, this will save this many, etc. Just so we have a concrete place to go from there.
Just to summarize, so we should sign off because we're 20 minutes over. But yeah, I guess to summarize our previous discussion, we didn't quite. I think we have an action there for now, which is to just turn off the test if it's really flaky and we can't get it. That's basically where we landed. Like that feels like the right choice. Obviously, we want to investigate it when we have time and bandwidth, but it's okay to turn off a test that's just failing more than it's giving us.
And we probably do that with a tag. Yeah.
Okay. And we're going to do this tag thing to turn off the test. Okay. So that's a clear action item there. I'm going to look at the ALweaver one to make sure it's not actually a real issue. I don't think we have that installed anywhere yet because it's really just a refactor. But this broader idea of maybe solving some of the timeout problems someday by spinning up a new server, but that feels not too realistic for us to be able to justify engineering time on if it's a big
Not
challenge.
at the moment. I think it is a pretty
up high in the sky. If it was there, it would be great.
We'll look at this issue in 2 years and say, oh yeah, maybe we should tackle that one now.
It's for when or whenever we have a DevOps person specifically.
Right.
So
Good point. That's the kind of thing a DevOps person should be able to help us with.
Mm.
All right. Although we'll probably be a very junior DevOps person, so they may not be any more qualified than we are.
if they've got the time.
They'll have the time. Yes, that's true. Okay.